The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of the corporate building, casting long beams of gold across the polished marble floor. People in suits hurried past, their footsteps echoing with confidence and purpose. Every face carried the same look of power and privilege, a silent reminder that this was a place meant only for the successful. And in the middle of all that, a young woman stood nervously near the reception desk, clutching a small folder to her chest. Her name was Alyssa Carter, and though her clothes were simple, faded jeans, a plain green t-shirt, and a black cap pulled low over her braided hair, her heart carried the weight of a dream too powerful to be ignored. She had come to this company to ask for a small investment in a project she believed could change lives. She was not here to beg for help, but to offer an opportunity, one that could uplift hundreds of struggling young people who just needed a chance to prove their worth. Yet as she stood there, she could already feel the weight of eyes watching her, judging her, questioning why someone who looked like her even dared to be here. "Good morning," Alyssa said softly, her voice barely louder than the hum of conversation around her. "I have an appointment with Mr. Hughes. He said he would meet me today to discuss a community funding proposal." The receptionist behind the counter looked up, her expression polite but cold. She gave Alyssa a quick glance, eyes scanning her from head to toe, and then down to the folder clutched tightly in her hands. "And you are?" she asked with a tone that made Alyssa feel smaller than she already did. "Alyssa Carter," she replied, trying to smile. "I confirmed with his office last week." The receptionist frowned, clicking at her computer keyboard. I don't see your name here," she said after a few seconds. "Are you sure you're at the right company?" Alyssa nodded quickly, her voice steady even as her stomach twisted with anxiety. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sure. He personally replied to my email." The receptionist sighed, rolling her eyes slightly. "Hold on," she muttered before turning to whisper something to the woman beside her. Alyssa could hear faint laughter. The receptionist leaned in again, smiling in that way people do when they think they're better than you. "Maybe you should check with security at the back. We don't usually take walk-ins without an appointment." Alyssa felt her cheeks warm. "But I do have one," she said, showing the printed confirmation email. The woman barely looked at it. "Please wait," she said and turned away. A few minutes later, a tall man in a navy suit stepped out of the elevator, holding a coffee cup in one hand and his phone in the other. He walked with an air of authority, the kind of man used to being obeyed the moment he spoke. The receptionist called to him. "Mr. Hughes, this lady says she has an appointment with you." He turned, his eyes landing on Alyssa. For a moment, his brows furrowed, then his lips curved into a half-smile. "You're Ms. Carter?" he asked, his tone disbelieving. Alyssa nodded and extended her hand politely. "Yes, sir. I emailed you about the community development program for young coders. You said you'd be open to discussing how your company might—" He cut her off with a chuckle. Right. I do remember the email. I just didn't expect—" He paused and gave her another slow, assessing look. "Didn't expect you to come in person." Alyssa tried to keep her voice calm. "I thought it would be better to present it directly. It's a project that means a lot to me." By now, a few more executives had gathered nearby, curious about the conversation. They stood in small clusters, whispering and smirking. One of them leaned toward another and muttered something that made them both laugh quietly. Alyssa pretended not to notice, but inside she felt the sting. Mr. Hughes placed his coffee cup on the counter and crossed his arms. "Look, Ms. Carter," he said in a tone that sounded almost kind but carried sharpness beneath the surface. "We get a lot of proposals here. People come in every day asking for money. Some are legitimate, some are, well, let's just say misguided." Alyssa nodded quickly. "I understand that, sir. But this one isn't just about funding. It's about opportunity. I want to build a training center for underprivileged youth, give them a chance to learn coding, design, and digital skills. We can partner with your company for job placements and—" He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "That's nice," he said with an exaggerated smile. "But we're not in the business of charity. We invest in things that bring real returns." Behind him, one of the executives laughed and said loudly, "Maybe she's lost. The soup kitchen is down the street." The others burst into laughter. Alyssa felt her throat tighten, but she stood her ground. "Sir," she said quietly, "this project can make a real difference. It can change lives. Maybe not for you, but for so many others who never get a chance." Her sincerity only made them laugh harder. One of the men leaned over the counter and said, "You really think a company like ours would waste time on this?" The woman beside him giggled and whispered something that Alyssa couldn't hear, but it made the group laugh even louder. Mr. Hughes finally sighed and shook his head. "Look," he said, his tone now dismissive, "I don't know who told you to come here, but this isn't how business works. You don't just walk in here looking like that and expect to be taken seriously." Alyssa blinked, hurt spreading across her face. "Looking like that?" she repeated softly. He smirked. "Yeah, this is a professional environment, not a charity drive. Maybe next time dress the part." She swallowed hard, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. "I came to talk about something that could help people," she said quietly. "Not about what I'm wearing." One of the younger executives scoffed. "People like you always say that. Always acting like victims. Maybe try getting a real job first." Then another voice, colder than the rest, cut through the noise. "Get lost, ape." The words were sharp, cruel, and filled with the kind of hate that makes the air go still. For a moment, the entire lobby fell silent, and even Alyssa couldn't believe what she had just heard. Mr. Hughes didn't stop them. Instead, he gave a faint, amused smile and turned back to pick up his coffee cup. "I think we're done here," he said. Alyssa stood there frozen, her hands trembling as tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to scream, to tell them how wrong they were, how much she had worked for this dream, but no words came out. Her grandmother's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Never let anger make you lose your grace. Let your silence speak for you." She took a shaky breath, straightened her back, and whispered, "Thank you for your time." Her voice broke slightly, but her dignity didn't. As she turned away, one of the executives called after her, "Don't forget your hat, sweetheart." More laughter followed. The sound chased her all the way to the glass doors. Outside, the city was alive with movement. Cars rushing past, people hurrying to their offices, life continuing as if nothing had happened. Alyssa walked slowly toward the bus stop, her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall. Her heart felt heavy, yet somewhere deep inside a fire was starting to burn. She sat down on the bench, staring blankly at the traffic. Her mind replayed their laughter over and over until it started to fade, replaced by something else. Determination. "One day," she whispered to herself, "you'll remember this moment. You'll remember me." That evening, back in her small apartment, Alyssa placed her folder on the desk and opened her laptop. The familiar glow of the screen filled the room as she stared at the name of her small startup, Carter Innovations. It was barely 2 years old, but already making waves in the tech world for developing low-cost software for education programs. Her company had been built from nothing. No family money, no investors, just sleepless nights, hard work, and the belief that she could create something meaningful. The same people who had laughed at her would one day wish they had listened. She opened her inbox and saw the last email she had received from a major investor interested in her company. For a moment, she hovered over the reply button. Then she closed it. "Not yet," she said softly. "They'll find out who I am soon enough." She leaned back in her chair and exhaled, letting the silence of the room calm her thoughts. The humiliation still burned, but it no longer hurt the same way. Now it felt like motivation, raw, unstoppable motivation. They had looked at her and seen weakness, but what they failed to see was her strength, the kind that doesn't come from money or appearance, but from endurance. That night, Alyssa wrote in her journal, her pen moving slowly across the paper, "They laugh today, but one day they'll stand when I walk in." The words were simple, but they carried all her pain and promise. She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and looked out at the skyline. The city lights blinked like stars, distant but full of possibility. Somewhere in that glittering view was the building that had made her cry. But she smiled now because she knew destiny was patient, and so was she. Life had taught her that no rejection is permanent, and no insult can define your worth unless you let it. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was a quiet whisper in her heart. "They denied me today, but soon, they'll know who I truly am." Long before Alyssa Carter ever stepped foot inside that shining glass building, she had lived a life far away from boardrooms and business suits. Her story did not begin with privilege or power, but with survival. She grew up in the narrow streets of East Brooklyn, where cracked pavements and flickering streetlights told stories of people forgotten by the city's success. Her home was a small 2-room apartment that smelled of laundry soap and fried onions. a place held together more by love than money. Her grandmother, Evelyn Carter, was the kind of woman whose hands told the story of her life, rough, worn, but steady. She worked 2 jobs cleaning offices and washing dishes just to keep food on the table. Alyssa's parents had died when she was only 9, her mother from illness and her father in an accident at a construction site. After that, it was just the 2 of them. Evelyn used to tell her, "We may not have much, baby, but we have our dignity, and that's worth more than gold." Those words became the foundation Alyssa built her life upon. Though back then she never imagined how much she would need them. School was her escape. She loved learning. While other kids teased her for wearing secondhand clothes, Alyssa buried herself in books. She stayed late in the library, fascinated by computers, by how something invisible like code could create worlds people could see and touch. Her teachers noticed her potential early on. "You've got a brain made for technology," one teacher said, smiling as he handed her a used laptop donated to the school. It was old, slow, and missing a few keys, but to Alyssa it was treasure. Every night after helping her grandmother clean offices, she would sit on the small kitchen table and teach herself coding through free online tutorials. Sometimes the internet would cut out halfway through, and she'd write lines of code on paper, testing them later when the connection returned. That old laptop became her window to a future she had never thought possible. Still, life in that neighborhood was not kind. The noise of police sirens and arguments outside their window was constant. Friends from school disappeared into gangs, drugs, or early pregnancies. Opportunities never came to people there. They had to be created, and Alyssa understood that too well. She watched her grandmother's body grow weaker with every passing year. The woman who had once carried cleaning supplies up 3 flights of stairs now needed help walking across the room. There were nights when Evelyn would cough for hours, and Alyssa would stay awake holding her hand, whispering promises she was determined to keep. "One day, Grandma," she would say, "I'll build something that makes life better for people like us." Evelyn would smile faintly, eyes tired but proud. "I believe you, baby. You always had more fight in you than this world expected." When Alyssa graduated high school, she had no money for college. Scholarships became her only hope. She applied to every single one she could find, writing essays on the kitchen floor, using an old phone to check deadlines, running to the library printer every time she needed copies. Rejection letters came first, dozens of them. But she didn't give up. Finally, one morning as she was pouring her grandmother's tea, an email arrived that changed everything. She had been awarded a full scholarship to study computer science at a major university. Evelyn cried that day, her frail hands covering her face, whispering, "You did it, baby. You really did it." They hugged for a long time in that tiny kitchen, and for once it felt like the world was giving something back. University life, however, was not easy. Alyssa was one of the few students who came from a poor background. Her classmates drove cars to campus while she took 2 buses and walked half a mile just to make it to lectures. Her clothes were plain, her backpack worn, and her shoes sometimes taped where the soles had cracked. Some students ignored her, others whispered behind her back. There were times she felt invisible, sitting in a corner of the cafeteria eating the same sandwich she packed every day. Yet she never let pride stop her from learning. She worked at the library at night and cleaned dorms on weekends. Every dollar went into her education. While others spent spring breaks traveling, she used those weeks to study and take online freelance projects. Slowly, she built a reputation for being one of the most talented young programmers in her department. Professors began recommending her for research projects and internships. Still, she never forgot where she came from. On weekends, she volunteered at a local youth center, teaching kids from low-income families how to use computers. "If I can do it," she would tell them with a smile, "so can you." But her happiest moments always led her back to her grandmother. Every semester, Alyssa would travel home, bringing small gifts and stories from campus. They would sit on the same old couch, laughing about the strange world of university life. But as the years passed, Evelyn's health began to fail. The coughing became worse and the hospital visits more frequent. Alyssa wanted to quit school to care for her, but her grandmother refused. "You keep going," she insisted. "You get that degree. Don't let my life be the reason you stop living yours." Those were the last words she ever said to her. Evelyn passed away quietly one winter night, leaving Alyssa alone for the first time in her life. For days, Alyssa could not speak. The apartment felt empty. the silence too heavy to bear. Yet in her grief she remembered the promises she had made. She finished her degree, graduated at the top of her class, and walked across the stage with her grandmother's old locket around her neck. As she looked up at the crowd, she whispered, "This is for you, Grandma." After graduation, she faced the cold reality of the corporate world. Big companies wanted experience, not potential. Every job interview seemed to end the same way: smiles, handshakes, and polite rejection emails that all said, "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." Sometimes she wondered if it was her lack of connections, her humble background, or simply the way she looked that kept doors closed. But she refused to stop trying. For months, she applied to companies across the country while working side jobs to survive, waiting tables, fixing old laptops, even tutoring children in math and computer skills. Each experience taught her something new. She realized that while big corporations chase profits, small people like her could build change from the ground up. That thought planted a seed in her heart. It was during one of those long nights in her small rented room that the idea for her own startup was born. She wanted to create something that helped people from underprivileged areas learn the skills that had changed her life: coding, digital literacy, and business confidence. She named it Carter Innovations in memory of her grandmother, and started with nothing but a second-hand computer and free online tools. At first, no one paid attention. She spent hours emailing schools, nonprofits, and investors, explaining her vision. Most never replied. But one day, a small local community center agreed to partner with her. That was all she needed, a chance. She began teaching small groups of teenagers after school, showing them how to code, build websites, and use technology to solve problems in their neighborhoods. The results were incredible. Kids who had never touched a computer before started building apps and finding jobs. Word spread, and soon other centers wanted her help. What began as one small classroom turned into a growing movement. Within 2 years, Carter Innovations had grown beyond anything Alyssa imagined. She built a small team, got her first investor, and began collaborating with larger organizations that believed in her cause. But the journey wasn't easy. There were nights when she slept in her office, days when she had no idea how to pay the rent. Yet every time doubt crept in, she would hear her grandmother's voice again, steady and proud. "We have our dignity, baby. Never let anyone take that away." That voice became her strength through every obstacle, and when success finally came knocking, when her company started getting recognized for its impact, Alyssa remained humble. She didn't seek fame or glory. All she wanted was to help others find the same light she had fought for in the dark. So, on that morning when she walked into the big corporate building with her simple clothes and old backpack, no one could have guessed the truth. They saw a poor girl asking for money, but what they didn't see was the years of struggle, sacrifice, and silent resilience that had shaped her. They didn't see the nights she had spent coding by candlelight or the mornings she had gone hungry just to buy internet data for her work. They didn't know that the woman they mocked had already built something far greater than their arrogance could comprehend. They didn't know that her name, Alyssa Carter, was about to become a symbol of hope, strength, and poetic justice. The past they dismissed as weakness was, in fact, the foundation of her power. And while they laughed behind glass walls, Alyssa was already preparing for the day she would walk back through those same doors, not as a beggar, but as the new owner. The night after that humiliating encounter, Alyssa barely slept. Her mind kept replaying every cruel laugh, every word that tore at her dignity, every smirk that told her she did not belong. She lay staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, the hum of the city outside blending with the storm of thoughts in her head. Somewhere deep inside her chest, she felt the ache of injustice, but also something sharper, a spark of defiance that refused to die. She rose from bed before sunrise, pulled back the curtains, and stared at the skyline. The city lights were fading into morning, the tallest buildings glowing in the soft pink dawn. Among them was the same company's tower, the one where they told her to get lost. She whispered under her breath, "One day you'll work for me." Her words were not angry. They were a promise. That morning marked the moment Alyssa stopped chasing validation and started building an empire. She sat down at her desk, her laptop screen lighting up the dim room. She opened her project files and financial sheets, rows of numbers that reflected both progress and struggle. Carter Innovations had been growing slowly, but it was not yet where she wanted it to be. Most of her clients were small nonprofits and schools, people who believed in her cause but could not pay much. Yet Alyssa knew value was not always measured in money. Every young person she trained was a living testimony of what she stood for. Still, she understood that to create bigger change, she needed bigger influence, and that meant stepping into the same spaces that once looked down on her. So instead of burying herself in anger, she began planning. She reviewed her company's goals, investor lists, and potential partnerships. She noticed something interesting. One of the corporations struggling financially was the very firm that had humiliated her. They had been losing clients for months due to outdated technology and poor public image. Alyssa leaned back in her chair, a faint smile curving her lips. "Life does come full circle," she murmured. The following weeks became a blur of hard work. Alyssa threw herself into her mission like a storm with purpose. She spent her days leading training sessions and her nights meeting with investors through video calls. Her passion was contagious. Everyone who met her could feel that she was not chasing wealth, but change. She spoke with a conviction that could move hearts. Technology shouldn't just belong to the rich, she would say in meetings. It should empower the ones who've been left behind. Some investors nodded politely, others dismissed her ideas, but a few saw something rare, an unstoppable woman with fire in her eyes and integrity in her voice. One night she received a message from Jonathan Pierce, a respected venture capitalist known for supporting minority-owned startups. He wanted to meet. The next morning they sat across from each other in a cozy coffee shop downtown. Jonathan listened quietly as Alyssa explained her vision. She didn't use fancy words or rehearsed lines. She spoke from the heart. When she finished, he smiled and said, "You remind me of myself 20 years ago, hungry, determined, and not waiting for anyone's permission. Let's talk about expanding Carter Innovations." That meeting changed everything. Within a month, Alyssa secured her largest round of funding yet. For the first time, she could hire a full team, young developers, educators, and project managers who shared her dream. The office was modest but alive with purpose. The walls were covered with inspirational quotes, sticky notes, and ideas scribbled in marker. She made sure every person there felt valued, regardless of their background. "We build from the ground up," she told her team. "And we lift others as we rise." Her company began developing affordable tech platforms for education, online job training, and community development. News outlets started noticing. Journalists wrote about the young woman who had turned adversity into innovation. People began calling her the CEO with a heart. Yet despite the attention, Alyssa stayed grounded. She still visited the same youth centers she started in, mentoring kids and reminding them, success isn't measured by where you are now, but by how many people you bring with you. One evening, as she reviewed reports at her desk, her assistant knocked on the door. "You might want to see this," he said, holding up a tablet. It was an article about the financial troubles of a major corporate firm, Hughes and Monroe Enterprises. Alyssa froze for a moment. The name hit her like an echo from the past. It was the same company where she had been insulted, the same faces that had laughed as she stood there in tears. The article explained how their outdated systems and poor leadership had led to declining revenue and public criticism. Employees were leaving, clients were suing, and the company was now seeking acquisition to avoid collapse. Alyssa set the tablet down slowly, her mind silent for a moment. She thought of that morning in the lobby, of her shaking hands, of the voice that called her names. A deep calm spread through her. "We're buying them," she said quietly. Her assistant blinked in shock. "Buying them? That's huge." Alyssa nodded. "Exactly. It's time." Over the next few weeks, she began the process strategically. With her growing network of investors and Jonathan's backing, she formed a coalition under her company's name to purchase the struggling corporation. The plan wasn't about revenge, it was about opportunity. She saw potential in their infrastructure, in their reach, and even in their employees who deserved better leadership. Still, part of her couldn't ignore the poetic justice of it all. She remembered how they dismissed her project, how they laughed at her dream, and how they told her she didn't belong in their world. Now she was about to own that very world. The negotiations took time, but Alyssa was patient and precise. She studied every contract, every loophole, every clause. She didn't rush because she knew this was destiny unfolding at its own pace. Late one night, after signing another stack of documents, Alyssa looked up at the city skyline from her office window. The lights shimmered like scattered stars, and she felt a sense of quiet pride. "Grandma," she whispered. We're almost there. She imagined Evelyn's warm smile, her tired eyes shining with pride. The thought brought tears to Alyssa's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not pain. Everything she had endured, the hunger, the rejections, the humiliation, had brought her here. And now she wasn't just surviving. She was rising. But Alyssa wasn't the type to celebrate too early. She knew that true victory wasn't just about taking over a company. It was about transforming it. She wanted Hughes and Monroe to become something good, something ethical, something her grandmother would have been proud of. As the final stages of the acquisition approached, Alyssa prepared for what would soon be one of the most powerful moments of her life. The day she would step into that boardroom again, not as the girl they mocked, but as the woman who now owned everything they thought she never could. But even as she imagined their shocked faces, she felt no anger, no desire for revenge. Instead, she felt peace, because she understood something that those people never did. Success without kindness is just another form of emptiness. Her journey had taught her that real power wasn't in making others feel small. It was in showing them what humanity looks like at its strongest. That night, as rain pattered softly against her office window, Alyssa closed her laptop and sat in silence for a long time. She thought about the children she had trained, the mothers who thanked her for giving their kids hope, the teachers who used her programs to change lives. She realized she had already won long before any contract was signed. Still, she smiled at the thought of walking into that boardroom, watching their faces when they recognized her. Life had come full circle, and she was finally standing in her purpose. As she turned off the lights and prepared to leave, she whispered again, almost like a prayer. You can break my heart, but you can't break my will. I was born to rise. The rain outside grew heavier, washing the city clean, and Alyssa stepped out into the night with her umbrella, feeling the rhythm of renewal in every drop. The world had once told her she didn't belong, but now she belonged everywhere her courage could reach. The next dawn would bring her moment, the moment when the same people who denied her money would finally realize who she truly was. Not a girl asking for approval, but a woman who turned pain into power and rose from the ashes stronger than ever. The day of the meeting arrived quietly, but inside Alyssa's heart it felt like thunder. The morning sun rose golden over the skyline, spilling light on the very building that once made her cry. That tower of glass and pride stood like a monument to arrogance, and yet today, it would witness its own humbling. As her car rolled up to the entrance, memories flashed in her mind, her trembling hands holding a proposal, the cold laughter, the cruel words that branded her soul that day. She remembered walking out of those same glass doors with tears in her eyes, feeling invisible and small. But today was different. Today those doors would open for her, not to push her out but to welcome her in. Her name was now on the acquisition contract. She was no longer the girl seeking approval. She was the woman they would now answer to. As her driver stopped, Alyssa took a slow breath and smiled faintly. I'll walk from here, she said softly, wanting to feel each step herself. The moment she stepped out, people noticed her. The security guards who once ignored her now rushed to open the door, greeting her with nervous smiles. The lobby looked the same, the polished floor, the smell of coffee, the quiet hum of expensive perfume and whispered gossip. But to her it felt entirely different. She stood there for a second, letting the air touch her face, letting the past and the present merge in one silent victory. Some of the same receptionists still worked there. When they saw her, they straightened in surprise, perhaps trying to remember where they had seen her before. Alyssa walked to the front desk with quiet confidence. Good morning, she said kindly. I'm here for the board meeting. The receptionist stammered, Yes, of course. The board is waiting on the 12th floor, ma'am. The word ma'am made her heart twist in irony. How easily respect appeared when power did. But Alyssa didn't dwell on it. She simply smiled and said, Thank you. Then she entered the elevator, and as the doors closed, her reflection looked back at her. Calm, elegant, and strong. She was no longer a visitor. She was the owner. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 12th floor. When the doors opened, a long corridor stretched ahead, lined with glass offices and the faint murmur of voices. At the far end, a large conference room waited, its doors closed, but its tension heavy in the air. Inside sat the company's board of directors, the same people who once laughed as she stood helpless in the lobby. The once proud executives now faced layoffs, uncertainty, and fear. Their empire had crumbled under their own arrogance. As Alyssa walked down the hall, her heels clicking rhythmically against the floor, several employees looked up from their desks, whispering to each other. They didn't yet know who she was, but they could feel the authority she carried. When she finally reached the door, her assistant Mark met her there. "They're ready for you," he said quietly. Alyssa took a slow breath and nodded. "Then let's begin." The room fell silent the moment she stepped inside. Every head turned toward her. Mr. Hughes, the same man who had mocked her that day, sat at the end of the table, pale and uneasy. His expensive suit could not hide the nervous way his fingers tapped against the desk. The other executives exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected a corporate representative, not a young woman with familiar eyes. Alyssa placed her folder on the table and looked around the room with calm composure. "Good morning," she began. "My name is Alyssa Carter, CEO of Carter Innovations. As of today, my company officially finalizes the acquisition of Hughes and Monroe Enterprises." For a moment, there was only silence. Then a whisper spread around the table like wind through dry leaves. Mr. Hughes blinked, his jaw tightening. "You?" he said softly, disbelief dripping from his voice. "You're the one who bought us?" Alyssa smiled faintly, her tone steady and kind. "Yes, the same woman you told to get lost." The color drained from his face. No one in the room moved. It was as if time had paused, forcing every one of them to remember the weight of their words from that day. Alyssa didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at them, her calm presence saying more than any anger ever could. "I know this is unexpected," she continued, "but I believe in second chances, even for companies that once failed to see potential." Her words hung in the air, graceful yet firm. She turned on the projector and began to explain her vision. Her team, seated beside her, handed out documents showing new initiatives, employee welfare programs, fair hiring systems, and community engagement plans. "This company," she said, "has been losing not because it lacks talent, but because it lost its values. My goal is not to destroy what remains, but to rebuild it, from the inside out." Some of the executives lowered their eyes in shame. One woman at the far end spoke softly. "Miss Carter, we didn't know." Alyssa looked at her with calm compassion. "That's the problem," she said. "People like me walk into rooms like this every day and no one sees them. Not because they're invisible, but because others refuse to look." Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept her dignity intact. "I came here once not for charity, but to offer partnership. You all laughed. You saw my clothes, not my idea. My skin, not my skill. My background, not my potential." She paused and looked directly at Hughes. "But I am not here today for revenge. I am here because I believe in what this company could be, if it learns humility." Hughes shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Miss Carter," he began, forcing a smile. "Business is business, you know how it is." She cut him off, her tone still gentle but unyielding. "No, Mr. Hughes, business is people. Without respect, you build nothing." Her words landed heavy, and for a moment even the air felt still. Hughes had nothing to say. His silence was his apology. Alyssa turned toward the rest of the board. "From this day forward, we are restructuring. No more favoritism, no more arrogance. We will work with integrity and we will serve the communities we ignored for too long." The team behind her nodded firmly. She then added softly, "And yes, we will begin by funding the same project I once brought to you, the one you refused to hear." Her voice softened further. "Because that program wasn't just about teaching coding. It was about giving people hope." A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the executives nodded slowly, moved by her composure. Others stared in quiet regret. Mr. Hughes rubbed his temples, whispering something under his breath. Alyssa gathered her papers, ready to leave. But before she did, she looked back at him one last time. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" she asked softly. He looked up, ashamed, eyes red. "Yes," he whispered. "I remember," Alyssa nodded. "Good," she said. "Then remember this too, never judge someone by the surface. You never know who they'll become." With that, she turned and walked toward the door. The room remained silent, but behind her, a slow, hesitant round of applause began, first from one director, then another, until the sound filled the space. It wasn't the applause of admiration, but of awakening. Outside, Alyssa stood by the large window overlooking the city. The sun had climbed higher, bathing everything in gold. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, strong, calm, and proud. Mark joined her quietly, holding out a folder. "The contracts are all done," he said. "You own it, Alyssa." She smiled gently, still watching the city. "No," she replied softly. "We own it. Everyone who was ever told they weren't enough. Everyone who was laughed at, dismissed, or ignored. This is for them." Her voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through her steady tone. Mark smiled and nodded, understanding completely. In that moment, Alyssa felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the shallow peace that comes from winning, but the deep peace that comes from healing old wounds. Later that evening, as she left the building, the receptionist who had once ignored her stood and said, "Good night, Miss Carter." Alyssa smiled and nodded kindly. "Good night." Her voice was warm, free of bitterness. As she walked out into the evening breeze, she felt the weight of years lift from her shoulders. The city lights glimmered around her like silent witnesses. She looked up at the sky, whispering to herself, "We did it, Grandma." Somewhere beyond the clouds, she felt that love again. The same love that once gave her strength in a small kitchen filled with hope. Alyssa Carter had finally come full circle, not to destroy, but to rebuild. And in that simple act of grace, she showed the world the true definition of power. Not dominance, not pride, but dignity. The kind of power that rises quietly, heals deeply, and changes everything it touches. The meeting had ended hours ago, but the echo of Alyssa's voice still lingered in the walls of that glass tower. The boardroom was empty now, yet the silence inside it felt alive, heavy with reflection and quiet shame. Downstairs, employees whispered her name with awe, many of them realizing for the first time that the company's new owner was not some faceless investor from a faraway city, but the same young woman they had seen humiliated years ago in that very lobby. Word spread fast. "She's the one they laughed at," they said, "and now she's the CEO." Alyssa, however, wasn't celebrating. She sat in her new office, the same one that had once belonged to Mr. Hughes, staring out at the skyline, lost in thought. The city below glittered with evening lights, cars moving like veins of fire, and in that vast view she saw the reflection of her journey. Every rejection, every insult, every sleepless night had brought her here. But instead of triumph, she felt calm, almost solemn. She had achieved what so many dream of, yet the victory didn't taste of revenge. It tasted of justice, quiet and graceful. A knock came on the door. "Come in," she said softly. It was Mr. Hughes, no longer the proud man in an expensive suit, but someone smaller, humbled. He hesitated by the doorway, unsure if he was even allowed to speak. "May I?" he asked. Alyssa nodded politely. "Of course." He walked in, his steps heavy, his eyes avoiding hers. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice low, "I just wanted to apologize for everything." She turned her chair slowly to face him. "You don't need to call me Miss Carter," she said gently. "Alyssa is fine." He looked up, surprised by her kindness. "You have every right to hate me," he said, "to fire me, to ruin me even. I was cruel, I was arrogant. I saw you as nothing." Alyssa listened quietly, her hands folded on her desk. "And yet," she said after a moment, "you came to apologize." He nodded, his voice trembling. "Because I can't sleep knowing what I did. That day, I thought I was powerful because I had a title. I thought your dreams were small because you looked small. But now I see the truth. You were the bigger person all along." Alyssa smiled faintly, not out of pride but understanding. "Do you know what hurt the most that day?" she asked softly. Hughes shook his head. "It wasn't the insult," she said. "It wasn't the laughter. It was realizing how easily people lose their humanity when they think they're above others." Her words struck deep. Hughes lowered his eyes. "I deserve that," he whispered. "Maybe worse." She shook her head. "No one deserves hate, Mr. Hughes. What we all deserve is a chance to grow. That's what this company will stand for now. Growth through humility." Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned strength the hard way. Hughes looked at her in silence, then finally said, You're a better leader than I ever was. Alyssa's eyes softened. Maybe I just had better teachers, she said. My grandmother taught me that power means nothing if you can't use it to lift others. When he left the room, Alyssa turned back to the window, her reflection merging with the city lights. For a moment she saw not herself, but the faces of the young people she had taught. The kids who once sat in cramped classrooms learning code from old computers. They were the reason she fought so hard. Their futures were the foundation of her dream. The door opened again, this time with her assistant, Mark, stepping in holding a stack of papers. Alyssa, he said with a smile, the press conference is set for tomorrow. Everyone's waiting to hear your statement about the acquisition. Alyssa nodded. Good, but this isn't just a business announcement. I want it to mean something. Mark raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? She looked out the window again, her voice thoughtful. I'm going to tell them the truth. All of it. Not the version written in the newspapers, but the real story. How this company once denied me, and how that denial built the person I am now. The next day, the company's main lobby buzzed with cameras, journalists, and employees gathered in anticipation. A new banner hung across the wall. New vision, new leadership, new beginning. The words shimmered under the soft lights as reporters murmured and adjusted their microphones. When Alyssa appeared at the top of the staircase, the crowd fell silent. She wore a simple white suit, not extravagant, not loud, but strong and graceful, much like her presence. She didn't need to command attention. Her calm confidence did it for her. She stepped up to the podium, looked around the room, and smiled faintly. Good morning, she began. Her voice carried warmth, the kind that made even the coldest hearts listen. Some of you may remember me. Most of you probably don't. Years ago, I walked into this very building to share an idea, a vision to create opportunities for people who come from places like I did. I believed in partnership, in humanity, in progress. But I was turned away, laughed at, judged, dismissed. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the room. That experience didn't break me. It built me. It reminded me that sometimes rejection is just redirection in disguise. The audience listened in silence, every word sinking deeper than the last. She continued, when people deny your worth, it doesn't mean you have none. It just means they can't see it yet. So I kept going. I built Carter Innovations, not from wealth, but from belief. Belief that everyone deserves a chance to rise no matter where they start. And today that belief brings us all here. A soft murmur ran through the crowd. Alyssa's voice grew steadier, filled with quiet pride. This company is no longer just Hughes and Monroe Enterprises. As of today, it will be known as the Carter Foundation Group. Our mission will be simple: to combine business with compassion, to use technology not to compete but to connect, to open doors for the people once left standing outside. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes. Employees who had once felt invisible now stood taller, their faces filled with hope. After the speech, Alyssa took questions from the press. One journalist asked, Ms. Carter, how does it feel to take over the same company that once rejected you? Alyssa smiled gently, her eyes kind. It feels like forgiveness, she said simply. Not for them, but for myself. I carried that pain for years, but holding on to anger only chains you to the past. Letting go, that's real freedom. Her answer made headlines that night. Forgiveness is the new power, says CEO Alyssa Carter. But for Alyssa, it was never about headlines. It was about humanity. Later that afternoon, as the crowd dispersed and employees returned to their desks, Alyssa walked through the building slowly, greeting people by name, asking about their work, listening to their ideas. The same halls that once echoed with arrogance now buzzed with genuine respect. When she reached the lobby, she stopped where it all began, the reception desk. The same young woman who had once mocked her now stood there nervously, twisting her hands. Ms. Carter, she said quietly, I just want to say I'm sorry. For that day, for everything. Alyssa smiled warmly. What's your name? she asked. Clara, the woman whispered. Clara, Alyssa said, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. She paused, her tone gentle but firm. From now on, treat every person who walks through these doors like they matter. Because they do. The woman nodded quickly, tears filling her eyes. Alyssa reached out and touched her hand lightly. We're all learning, she said softly. Me too. That evening, when the building finally quieted, Alyssa went to the rooftop. The wind brushed against her face as she looked out over the city. The world below was glowing with millions of lives, each fighting their own battles, each dreaming their own dreams. She thought about her grandmother, her childhood, her struggles, and how every painful step had led her to this very moment. Grandma, she whispered into the night, you were right. Dignity really is worth more than gold. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She knew that her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough, everyone who had been laughed at for daring to dream. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a message from Mark. It was a simple text. The world needed to hear that today. Thank you. Alyssa smiled and typed back, we're just getting started. Then she put her phone away, took one last look at the city, and walked toward the elevator. Her heels clicked against the concrete, echoing with the rhythm of change. The world might still have its cruel voices, but she had learned something unshakable. Kindness could silence them better than anger ever could. Alyssa Carter, once denied, had become the face of something far greater than success. She had become proof that when life closes a door, sometimes it's because you were meant to own the whole building instead. Weeks passed after the press conference, but the impact of Alyssa Carter's words did not fade. Inside the company that once thrived on arrogance, a quiet revolution had begun. Employees spoke to each other differently now, more kindly, more patiently, more humanly. The air that once felt thick with competition now carried the sound of laughter and collaboration. Alyssa had changed not just the name of the company, but its soul. Her leadership was unlike anything people had known before. She didn't lead from behind a desk. She led by walking among her people. Every morning she greeted employees by name. She visited departments others had forgotten existed. When she passed the cleaning staff, she stopped to thank them personally. This place shines because of you, she would say with a smile. Her kindness wasn't performative. It was real, and people felt it. Slowly, the cold walls of the corporate world began to warm. For the first time, Hughes and Monroe, now the Carter Foundation Group, felt like a place where everyone mattered. But Alyssa didn't stop there. She knew true redemption wasn't just about internal change. It was about giving back to the world that had once denied her. So she launched a new initiative through her foundation, the Pathway Project, a national program to help underprivileged youth gain access to education, internships, and mentorships in technology. Every door that closed on me will open for someone else, she said at the launch ceremony. Her words resonated across the country. Applications poured in from small towns, inner-city schools, and struggling communities. Young people wrote to her, sharing their dreams of becoming engineers, designers, and innovators. Alyssa read every single letter, often late at night, sitting by her window with tears in her eyes. She saw herself in each story, the fear, the hope, the hunger to be seen. We're going to change their lives, she whispered to herself, and she meant it. The media followed her journey with fascination. Headlines called her the CEO who turned pain into purpose. Interviews poured in from magazines and television shows. But Alyssa always kept her focus on the mission, not the fame. This isn't about me, she told reporters. It's about everyone who was ever made to feel small. It's about reminding people that humility and humanity still belong in business. Her sincerity touched millions. Donations to the Pathway Project grew rapidly, and within months her foundation opened its first major training center, a sleek, modern facility built in the same neighborhood where she had grown up. When Alyssa arrived for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, she looked around at the streets that had once held her childhood struggles. The cracked pavements, the old corner store, the same schoolyard fence she used to lean on while waiting for the bus. Everything was still there, but now it was surrounded by something new. Hope. Her grandmother's face flashed in her memory, her gentle smile glowing like sunlight. "We did it, Grandma," Alyssa whispered as she cut the ribbon. Inside the center, dozens of teenagers gathered, their eyes bright with curiosity. "You're Alyssa Carter," one girl said shyly, holding a notebook. "I saw your story online." Alyssa knelt down slightly so she could look the girl in the eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "And one day the world will know your story too." The girl smiled nervously. "Do you really think someone like me can become successful?" Alyssa took her hand gently. "I don't just think so," she said. "I know it. Because someone like me already did." That moment would later become one of her favorite memories, not the applause from investors or the media attention, but the quiet exchange of belief between two dreamers. Because Alyssa knew that the greatest form of redemption wasn't being admired, it was helping others believe they could rise too. As the months went by, Alyssa's company flourished in ways no one expected. The program she introduced brought new partnerships, new energy, and new faith. Former competitors reached out, inspired by her methods. Even those who had doubted her began to speak her name with respect. Yet through all the success, Alyssa remained humble. Her office still looked simple. No gold plaques, no excessive luxury. The only thing she kept on her desk was a small framed photograph of her grandmother Evelyn, taken years ago in that tiny apartment kitchen. Beside it sat her grandmother's old locket, the one she had worn on graduation day. Whenever Alyssa felt tired or overwhelmed, she would touch the locket and remind herself, "Stay kind, stay grounded." One day, while reviewing reports, she received an email that made her pause. It was from Clara, the same receptionist who had once mocked her. The message was simple but heartfelt. "Ms. Carter, I wanted you to know that after that day you spoke to me, I started taking evening classes. I just got accepted into a business administration program. Thank you for believing people can change." Alyssa smiled warmly. She replied, "You didn't need my belief, Clara, you just needed your own. I'm proud of you." That exchange reminded her of something vital. Redemption wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had been part of her story, even those who once hurt her. Because forgiveness, she had learned, wasn't weakness, but it was freedom. Alyssa's influence grew beyond business. She began to speak at universities, conferences, and women's empowerment events. Every time she told her story, audiences wept, not because it was sad, but because it was real. She didn't sugarcoat her journey. She spoke of pain, of humiliation, of nights when she almost gave up. But she also spoke of resilience, the quiet kind that grows in people who refuse to surrender. "You don't need to be born powerful," she would say. "You just need to stay standing when the world tries to push you down." Her authenticity made her one of the most admired leaders in the country. Yet to her, the true reward was seeing the lives her foundation touched. The first graduates of the Pathway Project getting jobs, the families who sent thank you letters, the neighborhoods that now buzzed with opportunity instead of despair. Despite all her achievements, Alyssa never forgot that she had once been that scared girl in the lobby, clutching a folder while others laughed. Sometimes when she passed that same building, she would stop across the street and just look at it quietly. The tall glass windows reflected the world differently now. The light inside looked warmer, the energy softer. She realized then that she hadn't just taken ownership of a company. She had transformed it into something humane. That was the true redemption, turning a place of cruelty into a house of compassion. One evening, as the city settled into twilight, Alyssa found herself standing on the rooftop of her headquarters, watching the skyline flicker to life. The air smelled faintly of rain, the breeze gentle against her face. She closed her eyes and thought about her journey. The little girl with a second-hand laptop, the student who worked 2 jobs, the young woman who faced laughter and insult, the leader who now stood here surrounded by everything she had once dreamed of. Her phone buzzed, a message from Mark. "Alyssa, the board approved the new mentorship program for single mothers. Congratulations." She smiled softly. "That's not my win," she texted back. "It's theirs." Suddenly, she heard laughter from below, a group of interns chatting near the parking lot. They reminded her of herself years ago, full of nervous excitement and uncertain hope. She watched them for a while, then whispered, "Keep going, kids. The world needs your light." Her voice disappeared into the wind, but her heart felt full. Later that night, Alyssa sat alone in her office, finishing her last cup of tea. The city lights glowed like distant stars, and she felt a deep, quiet peace. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "We may not have much, baby, but we have our dignity." Alyssa smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Dignity had carried her through every storm. It had turned humiliation into purpose, rejection into resolve, and success into service. Her story wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about redemption through grace. Before leaving, she walked to the lobby one last time. The night janitor, an older man with kind eyes, greeted her. "Good night, Miss Carter," he said. Alyssa smiled. "Good night, James. Thank you for all that you do." He chuckled softly. "It's just cleaning, ma'am." She shook her head. "No, it's making sure the place stays bright. That's important." Her sincerity made him grin. As she stepped outside, the night sky opened with light rain. She didn't run for cover. She stood there, letting the drops fall softly against her face. It felt like the city itself was blessing her, cleansing the last traces of pain from her journey. Alyssa Carter had found what she'd been searching for all along. Not wealth, not recognition, but peace. Her story had come full circle. The girl they once denied was now the woman who gave back without bitterness. She had learned that real redemption doesn't come when others apologize. It comes when you choose to forgive, move forward, and build something beautiful out of the pieces that once broke you. And as she walked toward her car, her heart whispered one final truth she would carry forever. When life denies you, it's only teaching you how to create your own doors. Years passed, yet the story of Alyssa Carter never stopped inspiring people. What began as one woman's fight for dignity had become a movement that changed thousands of lives. The company that once stood as a symbol of arrogance now stood for compassion, innovation, and opportunity. Under Alyssa's leadership, the Carter Foundation Group became one of the most respected organizations in the world. But Alyssa had never been driven by fame or power. To her, true success was seeing others rise. She often said in interviews, "My greatest achievement isn't owning a company, it's watching people discover their worth." Her words carried weight because they came from a place of truth. She had lived through rejection, humiliation, and loneliness, and she had turned all of it into something powerful and good. Every employee who joined her company felt that energy, the feeling that they were part of something meaningful, something human. Her story became a reminder that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who change the world quietly. Alyssa's office still looked simple, much like the first one she had when she started Carter Innovations. She refused to let luxury cloud her purpose. On her desk were only 3 things: her grandmother's old locket, a picture of her first student group from the community center, and a small glass jar labeled Letters of Hope. It was filled with handwritten notes from people around the world who had been touched by her story. Some were from single mothers who started small businesses. Others were from students who earned scholarships through her programs. There were even letters from former executives, people who admitted that her example had made them reevaluate their own values. Every time Alyssa read one, her heart felt full. She would trace her fingers over the edges of those papers and whisper, "This is what success looks like." One afternoon, as she reviewed some expansion plans for the Pathway project, her assistant Mark entered with a soft knock. "You're trending again," he said with a grin. Alyssa chuckled. For what this time? Mark handed her a tablet showing a video clip that had gone viral on social media. It was a young woman speaking at a graduation ceremony. The caption read, "From orphan to engineer, her speech will make you cry." The video began with the girl saying, "When I was 15, I had no home, no family, and no hope. Then I joined the Pathway project. And one day I met a woman who told me, 'Your pain doesn't define you. Your courage does.'" That woman was Alyssa Carter. The audience in the video clapped and cheered as the girl held up her diploma, tears streaming down her face. Alyssa felt her eyes grow wet. She pressed her palm against her chest and whispered, "Oh, Grandma, look at what we started." Later that week, she traveled to that same graduation ceremony to surprise the students. When she entered the hall, the crowd erupted into applause. The young woman who gave the speech ran to her crying, "You came! Alyssa hugged her tightly. "Of course I did," she said. "How could I miss the best day of your life?" The moment was pure, raw, and beautiful. Cameras captured it, but Alyssa didn't care about publicity. She cared about the connection, the reminder that what you give from the heart always finds its way back to you. That day, she spoke to the graduates with her signature warmth. "I stand here not as someone above you, but beside you," she said. "Life will try to tell you who you are based on where you come from or what you look like. Don't listen. The world doesn't define you, you define it." Her voice cracked slightly as she finished. "And when people deny you, don't waste time proving them wrong. Just keep building until they have no choice but to see your light." After the event, Alyssa walked outside, away from the noise of the crowd, and stood beneath a large oak tree on campus. The wind brushed her hair softly. For a moment, she closed her eyes and listened to the sound of laughter and music drifting from the hall. It reminded her of her grandmother's small kitchen, of the nights she had stayed up dreaming about moments like this. The road she had walked had been long and painful, but every scar had meaning now. Her success wasn't about money. It was about meaning. She had taken something ugly, humiliation, and turned it into hope for others. That was her real legacy. Back at her headquarters, Alyssa began working on her next dream, a global scholarship fund for girls in developing countries. No girl should ever lose her dream because she can't afford it, she told her board during a meeting. The initiative quickly gained support from philanthropists around the world. Within a year, hundreds of young women received life-changing opportunities under what became known as the Evelyn Carter Scholarship, named in honor of her grandmother. At the award ceremony, Alyssa took the stage, holding back tears as she spoke. "This is for the woman who taught me that dignity has no price and kindness has no expiration date," she said. The audience rose in applause, and Alyssa looked up at the ceiling, imagining her grandmother's gentle eyes watching over her. "You're still teaching me, Grandma," she whispered. Outside of work, Alyssa remained grounded. She still visited her old neighborhood often, walking the same streets that had shaped her. Children would run up to her shouting her name, calling her Miss Alyssa. She would smile, kneel down, and ask about their dreams. "I want to be an engineer," one boy would say. "I want to be a teacher," another would add. "Then you will," she would reply softly, touching their shoulders with encouragement. She also started a mentorship cafe, a small, cozy place where young entrepreneurs could come, sit, share ideas, and get advice for free. "Every great empire starts with one conversation," she would tell them. Her cafe soon became a hub of inspiration, filled with laughter, late-night brainstorming, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. In her quieter moments, Alyssa loved sitting by the window of her apartment, sipping tea and writing in her journal. Her entries were simple reflections about life and growth. One night she wrote, "Power is not about standing at the top, it's about reaching down and pulling others up. I used to think success was about proving people wrong. Now I know it's about proving kindness right." She closed the journal and smiled. The city lights flickered below her, and somewhere in the distance she could see the building that had once rejected her. But now she didn't see it with pain. She saw it as part of her journey, a stepping stone that had led her to everything good that followed. "Thank you," she whispered to it. "If you hadn't denied me, I might never have discovered who I was meant to become." As the years went on, Alyssa's name became synonymous with hope. Universities invited her to give honorary speeches. Governments sought her advice on social programs. Even Hollywood approached her for documentaries. But she never let fame distract her. "I'm not a hero," she would say in interviews. "I'm just a woman who refused to give up." The humility in her words made her story even more powerful. People across the world quoted her speeches. Teachers used her journey as an example in classrooms, and her foundation continued to grow. She had not only built an empire, she had built a philosophy. That kindness, courage, and perseverance can rebuild even the most broken hearts. One evening, as Alyssa celebrated her 45th birthday, her team surprised her with a short film they had made, a montage of her life. It showed old photos of her as a child with her grandmother, her college graduation, her first office, and clips of every project she had launched. The final scene showed her standing on a stage, surrounded by smiling students from all backgrounds. Across the screen appeared the words, "She came to ask for help." The world said no, so she became the help the world needed. Alyssa's eyes filled with tears, She didn't speak for a moment. She just smiled through the emotion, whispering, "Thank you." When the night ended and everyone had gone home, Alyssa stood alone by her office window once again. The city was quiet, the stars faint above the skyline. She touched her grandmother's locket and smiled. "We made it," she said softly. "And we did it with grace." The reflection staring back at her in the glass wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every person she had lifted, every child she had inspired, every dream she had rekindled. Her story had become their story. That was her true legacy. Not wealth, not recognition, but the chain of kindness she had set in motion. And as she turned off the lights and walked out of her office, her footsteps echoed softly in the empty hallway, leaving behind a feeling that would never fade. The reminder that no rejection is the end of a story, only the beginning of something greater. Outside, the city lights glowed warmly, and the wind whispered through the streets she once walked as a nobody. Alyssa smiled as she looked up at the sky and said, "Grandma, I think the world's finally listening." And somewhere in the quiet hum of the city, it almost felt like the stars were smiling back.